easy, oh. Lesson time, baby. Oh, so easy, oh. Country African boy.
What's up, y'all? I'm Lex-Jordan Ibegbu, and thanks for tuning in to Wahala Talk. Today, we have a very special guest, one of the original believers and interviewees for Wahala Talk, U.S. Congresswoman for North Carolina's 2nd District, civil rights lawyer, and political veteran, Congresswoman Deborah Ross. How are you doing, Ms. Ross? Thank you so much for being here today.
I'm doing great, and I'm glad to be back. Am I the first person who's been on twice?
Hey, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
It's an honor.
Most definitely an honor to have you. So we'll get right into it, some of the nitty gritty, and speak about some things. So you've been active politically for some time now. So did you see this election that placed you in Congress as the culmination of the faith that you had in yourself, as well as the faith that you had in the North Carolina Triangle community?
Well, I saw this election as getting to celebrate Wake County and all of the wonderful people here and all of the different relationships I've built since I moved here more than 30 years ago. And it's so much fun representing your home and the people who you've known for ages, and then all these new people who have moved in. The community has grown with so many interesting people, new companies, new small businesses. And so it's really exciting. It feels like home.
Most definitely, it is home. Home is where the heart is. So we'll get into what some of the people want to know from your purview. What was your experience and what was your view of what would be looked upon as an infamous and iconic event on January 6th?
So we call it the insurrection. And it was an insurrection. But when it was happening, I didn't quite know everything that was going on because of COVID. We were told on the day that the electors were being announced that we shouldn't go to the House floor unless it was our time to vote or our time to speak. Well, the insurrection happened when they were doing the electors for Arizona and we weren't voting yet. So I was told to be in my office and wait for my time to vote. And what happened was they shut down one of the other office buildings, not my office building. I'm in Longworth, the middle of the office buildings. And so there were people from the other office building coming to our office building. And then they said that anybody in my office building should lock the doors, pull the blinds, get away from the windows, and turn off the TV. So people outside knew more about what was going on than I did because I was in my office. We didn't turn on the TV. So I was getting texts, I was getting emails, I was getting calls from people. And then I had some other meetings. So I just went about my business doing my stuff on my computer. And then we started to see everything that was happening. And it was kind of scary. I had one staff member with me because, again, it was COVID. So you didn't want to have a bunch of staff members. I felt so bad for him. He barely knew me, and he's here locked in this office with me for 13 hours. But the best part of the night was in the early evening around 8 o'clock, we got the notice that we were going to stay into as long as it took to vote to certify those electors. And so I didn't quite know what had happened to everybody else, the people who were hiding and the people who were, locked in rooms with other people they didn't know and got COVID. I was just like, okay, well, we'll go to the floor and vote when we're going to have to vote. And so we had to vote a few times because we had to do Arizona and then we had to do Pennsylvania. And eventually at like 3 o'clock in the morning, we finished up. But I know we don't have a lot of time, but the time that I knew that things were going to be okay was when we were told we could turn on C-SPAN. And I watched what was going on the floor on the Senate side because they moved first. and the speeches that the Republicans were giving, saying that they were going to certify the electors.
Well, we thank you for the courage and the tenacity to make it through something as traumatic as that, just to keep this democracy pushing forward. Now, in 2020 and up until 2021, we saw this country come to a standstill due to issues which have never been dealt with. Now, we know that government can't fix all of our problems, but it can fix the problems which it may have had a hand in causing. So with the new administration that has been set forth, will the Democratic Party try to engage in some type of practice to fix the racial economic disparities which were caused at the culmination of this democracy? Or will we be here again in 20 years?
Well, what I would say is we've started to, and there's no way that you can erase the original sin of this country, which is slavery. But what we can do is we can make sure that we have a policing system. And I know that this is not just about police, but that is what was raised over the summer that ignited the new fuel to do something to deal with racial inequities. So we've already passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and sent it to the Senate. But on the economic front, where there have been so many affronts, we passed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, which has given more relief to lower income individuals, but not just African Americans, lower income individuals in rural areas and all over, than any package since the Great Society program. It's going to lift half of our children out of poverty. It has more grant assistance, not just loans, but grant assistance to our small businesses. There was a huge package in there for Black farmers. And it is the beginning of this administration and this Congress showing their commitment to all of our people. Now, there's much, much more that needs to be done, and there are bills that have been introduced to do just those things. But in a couple of months, some work got done. And now we're dealing, after last week in Atlanta, with this country's horrible history of Asian discrimination. And last week, I'm the vice chair of the Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights and Civil Rights. It had been 34 years since that committee had a hearing on discrimination against Asian American and Pacific Islanders. 34 years. So there is a lot of work we have to do to deal with the sins of the past. But there's some wonderful things that we're seeing. Deb Haaland, the first Native American ever to be Secretary of the Interior. To finally have somebody who is a Native American dealing with our land, that's historic. So I don't think we're going to solve all the problems overnight, but I think we have definitely taken some steps forward in the right direction.
Most definitely. Kudos to Ms. Haaland. Now, we see some voices, some political voices asking that we heal. But what is your purview in that? How can we heal when some of those on the other side may have been advocating for harm to those who are now in power, and if the roles were reversed, would not have extended that hand to heal?
So I really believe in the model of truth and then reconciliation. So to just heal, it's like, it's like when you have a sore. If you haven't cleaned it out first, it's never going to heal. It's going to keep festering. So we need to make sure that we have a common understanding of what the truth is, that we take steps to right wrongs, and then we can truly heal. Otherwise, it's just going to bubble up again and again and again. But the thing that I think is different this time is that we are seeing people across races, across economic boundaries coming together. We saw that this summer, even in the middle of COVID. I went to several different demonstrations. I even went to a demonstration that was the faith community, the Jewish community, and Pullman Baptist, that was almost entirely Caucasians showing their support. When I went to Cary on Saturday night for the vigil on Asian hate crimes, the person who closed the vigil was the head of the local NAACP. So the only way we're going to make this lasting is for us to work with a majority of the people. And I believe a majority of the people want the truth and then want to heal.
We all need truth, but truth can be uncomfortable sometimes. Now,
Yeah, but you got to air it. So.
Yes, definitely. Now, when we look at after this recent election, the momentum that came forward. Now we look at Georgia and North Carolina and different states. Will the federal government or will anything come forth to stop the unconstitutional disenfranchisement of particularly Black and brown voters? But as with everything, when a certain community is attacked, it affects everybody. So that also goes to young voters. Or would this be allowed to happen such that it will hinder the progress and election of Democratic officials in the future?
Well, this House has passed HR 1, which would create a federal system for same-day voter registration, early voting, no excuse absentee voting, and say what the rules are for everyone. So it would effectively erase the voter suppression. I think there's more than 230 different pieces of legislation out there, more than 200. And if HR 1 passes, the Senate, it's already passed the House, but if it passes the Senate, this will go a long way. But we're not just going to pass one thing and leave it up to the Senate. We have a special elections committee that is going around the country to expose these kinds of laws and evidence of ongoing racism. Because what we know is that when the Supreme Court decided that parts of the Voting Rights Act were no longer needed anymore, because they said there wasn't any more racism that was going on in election laws and in redistricting, we knew that that wasn't true. And so now with all of these laws, these new laws that are being introduced all over the country, we've got that evidence. And so there will be hearings all over the country to make that case for whatever law passes in the event that it goes to court again. And you know it's going to go to court again.
Most definitely.
And G.K. Butterfield from the 1st Congressional District is leading up that effort.
I like to see the culmination of this effort as it comes to fruition, because we can't repeat the mistakes of the past. Now, everyone wants to get back to school. The variants are rolling and the vaccines are also rolling. But eventually we know we'll eventually get all the kids back to school. But for those kids who lack the resources, whether that's monetary or technologically, who fell behind what may be more than 2 years really, how will they become brought up back to speed?
So that is one of the biggest tragedies of the coronavirus. I want to just say that the fact that we had to go to online learning, it's better than if we did no learning, but has definitely left people who are already falling behind and already at a disadvantage even further behind. I can say that in the American Rescue Plan, there is money for technology, there is money for special programs. Wake County is dedicated to using some of its money for the schools. but you can't buy back time. And so what we're going to have to do is be sensitive to these issues and invest in them over time, and not just once, not just twice. We're going to have to invest in every single child and getting every single child to grade level. This has been a problem in North Carolina even before the coronavirus and the digital divide. We've had the Leandro lawsuit for decades. I was involved as a friend of the court in the original Leandro case to have every child get a sound basic education before people were even using the internet. And there now has been a proposal to have a fully funded Leandro program. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's recently been reported in the news. I think if the state does that in combination with the assistance that the federal government is giving through this package and future packages, we will give kids a fighting chance. We cannot give up on the next generation.
We can't give up on our children, and we have to invest in that social capital. Now, a portion of your district has or had, that's 27610, the highest COVID rate in the state of North Carolina. Coincidentally or not coincidentally, that is obviously the African American and Latino zip code. How can this devastating dynamic be remedied, and how can we learn from this going forward?
Well, the problem is not the virus, but the living conditions, the job opportunities, and the healthcare that 27610 has experienced for decades. So we know that if you are in close proximity to other people, you're more likely to get the virus. We know that if you're a frontline worker, you are more likely to get the virus. And we know if you have pre-existing health conditions, you are more likely to get the virus. And so we know that in that community, and that is our community. It's not some community somewhere else. This is all part of Wake County. It is all part of our responsibility, that there are more people who didn't have access to good health care, so they had pre-existing conditions. There are more people who worked in the service industry, which is definitely frontline. And there are more larger households living in a smaller area because they can't afford a big fancy house where everybody gets their own bedroom. And so that means that the coronavirus has thrived there. To the credit of the Wake County Health Department, Wake County has done what it can to have health interventions, to have more vaccine clinics, to have more testing, to provide rental assistance, and all sorts of things during the coronavirus pandemic. But that doesn't solve the underlying problem. And we need to work on the underlying problems. One of the great things in the American Rescue Plan was more incentive for North Carolina to expand Medicaid, which would disproportionately help that zip code. And hopefully with a sweetener, $2.4 billion of health care money in the next 2 years if we expand Medicaid. That would be extraordinary. So hopefully we will be able to do things like that. Hopefully the rental assistance that came through the coronavirus relief package will help people with our housing costs. Hopefully we will have paid sick leave that continues beyond the coronavirus pandemic so that people who have service industry jobs don't feel like they're gonna lose their job or not be able to feed their family if they go to work. This is something we have got to deal with from the bottom up, and we have got to care about all our people.
We have to care about all our people. Now, that takes me to the next question. Now, we see mounting pressure on President Biden in regards to the issue of student loans. Now, that we know that the borrowers that are most disproportionately affected by student loans are obviously by borrowers who are of color and or in lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Obviously, studies have shown that it would lend a greater effect to the economy to absolve these borrowers of this debt. Do you think that this wavering on the issue is due to the corporate interests that are within both parties? And what is your stance on this?
So I think the reason why President Biden has not gone for the highest amount of student loan forgiveness is because he is again focused on doing the greatest good for the greatest number, which is what the American Rescue Plan did. I have heard that he's interested in forgiving some student loan debt, but not at the highest amount, coupled, and this I read about just today, with free community college, which would reach even more people. And so I think his interest is making sure that whatever he does on higher education, either tuition free or loan assistance or whatever, reaches people in the lower and middle income categories and doesn't necessarily give a $50,000 check to people who are very affluent. And so I think he's looking for a combination of ways to approach this. It's kind of like whenever we do a university bond in North Carolina, to borrow money to help the universities. Have you noticed we always borrow money to help the community colleges too? Because we're afraid if we just put the universities to a vote of all of our people, it'll fail. And we need to have people in our universities and getting graduate degrees. We also need to make sure that people can get the skills that they need and the education that they need at community colleges. So I think what President Biden's trying to do is put together a package so that everybody benefits and that the American public doesn't feel like they're just paying for people who get higher education when some people have foregone a higher education. And I think that that's a smart way to do it, to give everybody help. So people who have student loan debt would get some assistance. People who are going to community colleges would get assistance. We just passed an apprenticeship bill that would invest money in people who want to have apprenticeships for fields where we need people to go, people who are plumbers and pipe fitters and do all sorts of skilled labor. So we need to invest in everybody. And I think that's the Biden administration approach. And I think it's a smart approach because it reaches all corners of our society.
I understand. Now we see continuing issues on the border that seeped in from former President Trump's administration into now President Biden's administration. So I ask first a broad question: should citizenship rights reign over human rights?
So what I would say is we need comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to have sympathy and humanity toward people who are trying to find a better life. Now, the House of Representatives passed 2 new immigration bills, one for the dreamers and for documented dreamers, because there are some people who come here documented, but it expires and then they are sent back to their countries, and a farm worker bill. And both of them have ways for people to have a path to citizenship through their education and through their work. We also need to have a humanitarian response at the border. This is not a new issue. And I am not making light of what is going on at the border right now. It is a humanitarian crisis. It has been a humanitarian crisis, but it is one of our own making for not dealing with comprehensive immigration reform sooner. I am thrilled that the 2 bills that have passed the House, but we have a lot more work to do. The good news about this administration is that it actually acknowledges that we need to do that work. And it's getting about the business of doing that rather than using the issue of immigration to further divide us.
We have to get in the business of doing the work rather than scapegoating. So I'll ask this question because you alluded to us dealing with the foundational issue. Does America, as a hegemon, in the region have a duty to maybe either alter or undo previous relationships, which led to regional instability, which funnels this current border crisis?
Absolutely. So we have got to get back to supporting good changes in government, humanitarian aid. Even before I got elected to Congress, I was, and I still am, part of the US Global Leadership Coalition, which is a group of, there are elected officials, there are NGOs, there are people from the military, people from business, people from the religious community who understand how much good American foreign aid can do to help people want to stay in their own countries, to help people with humanitarian assistance, with healthcare assistance, with food assistance, with assistance microloans, so that they can have their own businesses in their countries. So the more stable and the more other countries thrive, the less people will be coming to our country as refugees and for sanctuary. And we have got to recognize that we have a role to play, a positive role to play in foreign affairs, and a lot of that can be through foreign aid.
Definitely. And the last question, we'll bring it back home to Sweet Carolina. Now, with this district, is very much a lot of change going on. There was seemingly a pandemic which led to a housing boom. There's also many businesses coming here. Now, what changes do you want and see for your district post-pandemic and in the next 10 years?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the most immediate things we need to deal with is affordable housing. And we have seen how the lack of affordable housing has exacerbated the pandemic. We had an affordable housing problem to begin with. Now we're seeing even more how much we need to invest in affordable housing. I am hoping, and I think it will be the case, that affordable housing will be considered infrastructure in this infrastructure package. I know that Wake County is making affordable housing a higher priority. I'm hearing that many of the municipalities are making this a high priority. We're actually dedicating part of the budget to creative solutions on things like affordable housing. So that is so important. Transportation is another issue that is very important. We've forgotten about it a little during the coronavirus because people aren't driving their cars. But people who don't have cars have had to use public transportation, and that has been even more difficult because of the coronavirus. And so we've got to have more public transportation. That is mobility that can be translated into economic mobility. And we touched on this before, but we need more opportunities for more people to be able to get the education and the skills that they need for the jobs of the future. And so Wake Works is a wonderful apprenticeship program that just launched here in Wake County. I participated in the signing ceremony to sign up the first people who will get paid. They will get paid to get an education and get training to be in the jobs that we need here in Wake County. That's extraordinary, and our apprenticeship bill will help with that. I am hoping that President Biden's free or reduced community college tuition bill gets through. I'm hoping that we get some loan forgiveness. I also have a bill that would make sure that people who might be behind in their student loans don't lose professional licenses or driver's licenses. This is a bigger problem in some other states, but it's one of the very first bills that I introduced. So if we can make sure that people have housing, people have access to affordable health care, which we talked about earlier on, that people have access to transportation, and that there's an affordable way for them to get the skills and the education that they need, there is no limit to what can happen here in Wake County, in North Carolina, in this country. But we have got to invest in our people.
There is no limit because, you know, we have to be in the business of people, and you're in the business of people and not in the business of division. And we greatly appreciate your help, your work, and your service. Well, that's it, Ms. Ross. I know that you're busy. You got things going on. You're ripping and running. So we just want to say thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for taking the time for getting on Wahala Talk with me 2021 edition. And look forward to seeing you and doing this again post-pandemic in person. And if for everybody tuning in, hope you learned something, and much blessings and peace.
Less time, baby.